Hi everybody, welcome to Crackfox Studios, and in this video I'll be taking you through my process of painting the face of this 100% FDM Titus figurine and making it look as realistic and as gritty as I can. And I'll also be sharing my top tips that I think really bring a lot of life and realism to this paint job. I'll primarily be using the Army Painter Air Colour Triad system, plus a bunch of other cool techniques. Right then, let's crack on. Right, let's start off with the Nomad Flesh as the base coat. Might as well follow the system. And this is pretty straightforward base coating, but here's top tip number one. Print off a spare or two. Why bother, I hear you ask? Well, it lets you try different things on each one, or if you make a mistake on the first one, you can rectify it on the next one. This one I did a slightly heavier coat on the right hand side, for instance. And how it helped me out a lot on this particular project, because I'd not done many faces before, it just meant that when I was going to the next step, as putting on this Barbarian Flesh mid-tone, I wasn't too worried about messing it up because I always had a spare to go back to. So I could just treat this first head as a sort of test run. So what I'm obviously doing here is picking up all the higher spots, painting over about 80% of the base coat. And I know we've really just had top tip number one, but here's top tip number two. Remember to trust in the process. This part you see in here looks a bit messy. It's just to add definition and contrast between the facial features. It's nowhere near the finished job. It's all a process. Don't try to rush to the finish line in just one or two steps. Realism can't come from just one or two coats of paint. And do forgive me, I think off camera I swapped to the Wildling Flesh highlight paint at this stage. Probably going over about, 30% of the high parts of the face. And then I went back over with a very thin, watered down Barbarian Flesh, which is the mid-tone, just to blend it a little bit. Then I thought I'd see what Vallejo Bale Flesh would look like over the top. And it does look quite zombie-like and quite corpse-like, but it's like I say, we're just trying to add that contrast at the moment. And for me, I really want to see the differences in the facial features, whether it looks realistic or not. So back to Barbarian Flesh with the airbrush and just giving it a bit of a light spray from below mainly, but just to give it a little bit more health to the colour. And the other great thing about having a spare is that you can look back from one stage to another and adjust if necessary. And top tip number three, and these are coming thick and fast, is to speckle, as I do this quite early on. Speckling works really well when you paint a few light layers over the top of it. And this is just done using my airbrush at 10 to 15 psi. Keep your paint quite thick and just staccato bursts of paint. And after all that's done, it's on to top tip number three. We really are shifting through these. Anyway, yeah, it's washes. Red, blue, and yellow washes, really watered down. So as you can see, yeah, it's very, very thin. Put it on nice and quick. You're not really meant to see the red pigment, as you can see here. You want to brush it all off so that you just get it's like tinting the color rather than actually seeing any true red pigment. If you are seeing true red pigment, you need to get rid of it. So as you can see here, it's just giving it a bit of a red overall tint. Then for a bit more focus, you can always put a little bit extra underneath the eyes and in the recesses that would be a little bit redder. Then onto the blue, you can see here how much I'm watering it down. You got to go quick with blue because you don't want any blue pigments showing up at all. It looks really weird. This really is just to cool down that red a bit and, barely perceptible. You want to get 95+% of it off with your rag at the end. As you can see here, barely any real blue pigment. It's just toned it down a little bit. And then again, you can go through underneath the eyes, have that sort of like duller sort of tone, so just put some underneath the eyes and in the recesses, just like you did with the red. Yellow, you don't have to worry too much like you did with the blue, and that's just quick. Splat it on, rub it off dead quick. And just so you can see the subtle difference between the stages, here they are side by side. Only subtle differences, but it's all going to add up. Right, next I was going to use this grey white. It says Holy White, but it's a speed paint and it's actually really grey, as you saw. And why, I hear you ask, am I using speed paints in a non-speed painty way or airbrush paints in a non-airbrush painty way? It's just, I just like how thinned down they are and I just seem to have more control over them. And we're only a third of the way through and we're already at top tip number 5, which is unification. So we've done all this base work and now it's a case of putting over a bit of a thin top coat that's just going to marry it all up and just starting to look real. And as the model is his head looking slightly to the right, I want the light to come slightly from his left, so that's why I'm sort of spraying it from that angle, from the right of the screen. So now I'm actually going to use a speed paint, as it's intended to be used, but only quite sparingly, just into the real details, and certainly not all over the face. Don't want to ruin all the hard work that we've just done. And you know what? I was just going to do 5 top tips, but I've got through them that fast, and I've just got perhaps more to share. Top tip number 6, I think it is. I try and paint in a way that means that it's easy to go back a step, or as you can see here, I'm taking out some of the paint that I'd put on a little bit too heavy. So adopting an incremental process like this not only builds up the detail in stages to makes it richer overall, but it means it's easier to go back a stage or two if there's any mistakes made. Quick review of where we're at, and it's starting to look pretty decent. So I figured I'd part the flesh tones and move on to the hair. The speed paint brown over the undercoat colour didn't really work, so I'm going to come back to that and paint it black a little bit later. Just adding a little bit of detail edge highlighting to the scars with one of the original flesh tones from the start. Pretty straightforward. And once I'm happy with those, I go back through and paint underneath to the side or right next to the scars with a darker brown, just to add that sort of bevel effect, to just add that extra definition, make it pop out. And just to show you how that looks, things are really starting to move along now. Yeah, so decide to fix that hair. I'm trying not to go right to the edge of the hairline, so it would look too stark. I know I'm going to come back through with perhaps highlights and another wash or something, so I'm just going to leave myself a little bit of room there. Eyebrows for a model like this, you've literally got to sort of try and paint it like the eyebrows would actually be angled. Don't paint it in just one black strip. It would look it would look quite drawn on and sort of feminine, rather than sort of like the shaggy sort of random way that male eyebrows look. So that's a bit of a top tip, is sort of like, don't just think an eyebrow's an eyebrow and they're all done the same. You know, that goes with everything to do with skin tones and features and stuff. Added a bit of gold to I don't even know what they're called, the insignia sort of things. I'll add some highlights to them later just to make them a little bit more dimensional. Right, we're on to the eyes. Number one, first thing I do is draw a black line across that recess. So it's quite thin down to make it nice and easy to run off, and you just draw that black line across the top. Then using a mix of white and that speed paint, holy white, to get like a light mid-grey, because your eyes aren't white at all. If you look at them, they're different shades of grey and bits of red and all that kind of stuff. If they were bigger, you could add a lot more detail, but for now I'm just going with grey, and it's just a case of just being careful and just drawing them in, trying not to go too close to the edge. As you can see underneath, there's a bit of a brown line from when we were doing the washes on the eye, and we've obviously got that black line across the top. So just try and pick out the high part and not go into the recesses. But if you do go into the recesses, you can always paint the black lines back in again to give it a little bit more form. And here I'm going back in again with a little bit more of a reddish brown underneath the eye into that recess there. Again, this is going back to that last top tip. Have a look at videos online about how eyes are sort of made up. They're a lot more complicated than you think. There's there's red at the bottom, your eyes are grey and bits of red, there's black across the top, blah blah blah. And as you can see, just simple steps make the start of the eye look really great. I haven't really got any top tips for eyes because this is incredibly anxiety inducing for me. The last eyes I did were actually quite big eyes, almost life-size eyes on the T800 Arnold Schwarzenegger bust. Took nearly as long as the entire rest of the model itself. I know these are tiny eyes, actually, the fact that you could just put a little dot of grey. I had a look online, apparently his eyes are sort of like grey. I'm not going to be able to put too much detail in the iris at all, in fact, none at all. It's just to give an idea of an eye, really. You're not trying to sort of make it look perfect. The most important thing is to try and get them look balanced, even though they're not really balanced. For instance, his right eye is smaller than his left eye in this sculpture, just because of that's kind of realism for you. Nothing's perfect when it comes to facial features and biology. And here you go. I was actually pretty happy with this. Just I got quite a good amount of paint on the end of this tip just to give a blob, because it would just like the surface tension will make the circle shape. And if you look at that, that's actually pretty damn good. The one on the right, yeah, it was too big, so I'm going to go back through and paint that again. Again, going back to a top tip of being able to go back a step or two. As you can see, I've put the grey down, and now I'm going back with try and get the pupil as good as the left eye. Sorry, his right eye, but the left as you see it. And again, got a little bit more paint on the edge of the brush, trying to get the surface tension to do the work for me, and just contacting it just that bit. It's a little bit off, uncircular at this point, so again, high anxiety just going in. I've got like the shakiest hands ever, and I'm just trying to brace myself, but as you can see, not too bad at all. I do go back through in a second on each eye and draw the black line across the top again, because your eyes are darker across the top. His right eye, the one on the left of the screen, was perhaps slightly too bright at the top. The iris was poking through, so adding that black line back in again just made it look a lot more realistic. Oh, and so close to being done now. The last thing I want to do is mess up putting in this little dab of eye, the light reflection, to give it a bit of life. Just touch it, just a little bit less paint on it this time compared to the pupil, and you just want to make physical contact with it. You don't want to sort of do a paint stroke. You just want it, the contact, just to take off some pigment and put it into the eye. And then I gave it a coat of gloss varnish to give it that shine. So the only thing left to do was just tidy up the hair a little bit, adding a little bit more brown and some highlights, adding a little bit more definition to the gold insignia on his forehead. And that is it, really. So if you think it's a decent job, and if anything is going to help you out with your skin tones and face painting exploits, then please drop a comment and a like and a share or subscribe. Any support like this really helps YouTube help my channel grow by seeing that people are enjoying the content. So here's the finished thing in all its glory. And the next stage is going to be to paint all the rest of the figurine. So if you've enjoyed this, then yeah, like, comment and share and say hello, and come back for the next one. I'll catch you later.